What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Naruto Explain here, bringing you guys another Boruto 2 Blue Vortex discussion. Today I want to talk to you guys about what I think we've all been clamoring for ever since we got the reveal a few chapters ago, which is why did Kashin Koji save Boruto, and why did he take the path of training him following everything that happened, like Sasuke and the attack by Code and his claw grimes. It's been something that it does feel like this story is teasing a payoff for at a later point in time, but I want to discuss why Kashin Koji not only saving Boruto, but training him is a bigger deal than we might have anticipated, and why the story doesn't need to put off the reveal of the why behind both of these things for a later date and time, but instead it needs to pay it off within the next 2 volumes. Currently, we're halfway through volume 2 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, which, reminder, due to Boruto being a monthly manga, you only get 4 chapters per volume versus series that are weekly where you get 9 to 11 chapters depending on the page count for the volume itself and the page count for each chapter. We open up volume 2 with a flashback explaining what happened to Sasuke via chapter 5, and I think the bookend for the current volume number 2, so chapter 8, with a flashback on meeting Kashin Koji, is something that makes more sense in hindsight, opening and ending with that information, or doing so at some point in volume 3, which will be chapters 9 through 12. That's a big reveal of information that I don't think you roll the dice with by just giving us 1 or 2 panels and then you move on with it. Longtime viewers of the channel know that when we got the model reveal and the flashback of what he said happened with Kaguya when she came to Earth back in 2020, I got very annoyed that we continued to get snapshot storytelling instead of living in the moment to add more context. One of my gripes with the then writer of Boruto Naruto Next Generations, Ukyo Kodachi, was that whole method of snapshot storytelling, but as we've seen twice now with Kishimoto's drafts being the main thing the story is written off of now, we got the model backstory with this daughter fleshed out with a few pages, and we got the same thing with Sasuke being turned into a tree protecting Boruto. Adding more meat to the bone is something that is needed here with the Kashin Koji thing. We can't have what Kodachi did prior and what Jujutsu Kaisen does that annoys me to no end, where at times you get a couple panels here or there for something like this and then it just goes right back to the action. It's basically a sugar high. You get that moment paid off and then it crashes and then you move on to the next thing. Rinse and repeat. We need some meat shown here for how Kashin Koji found Boruto, because it would have been in the time when Boruto was alone, desperate and hurting because his mentor was just taken out saving him and Boruto's being hunted down by Code, someone who Kashin Koji has issues with and history with. We need to see how Koji stepped in to save Boruto. We need to see what led to Koji becoming Boruto's mentor and give us the reason to actually care about that bond and dynamic between the two. It's not enough to just say Jiraiya's clone is training Naruto's son and mentoring him and looking out for him. That's the bottom of the barrel level of writing. It's something I used to say that when I read a story and I give a critique to an author who wrote it, where there was real meat on the bone, but not enough to sink your teeth into, and that this was just scratching the surface to something that could be further explored without taking away from the story itself. That's where we're at right now, and looking at the story as it stands in this very moment, there are a few narrative plot points where a flashback works without taking away from the story we have. I'm not suggesting you do a whole chapter of flashbacks. That's not what I'm saying, but there is a way to deliver this where it doesn't slow down the pacing. Boruto is currently facing a bloodlusted Mitsuki who is in full-blown sage mode at the time of the start of the fight. Boruto just happened to be fighting against someone who uses sage mode, and Boruto just happens to have been allied with someone who uses sage mode, albeit a different type of sage mode, but there is a narrative there to explore, and it's an avenue you can use to show us some of that flashback, particularly if all the seeds are planted in both the anime and manga about Otsutsuki having a fear when it comes to sage mode due to how it uses chakra, and it being something viewed as dangerous due to the use of how it uses chakra. That could be something further explored if we do get a flashback. That's a different way to build more importance to the fight of Mitsuki versus Boruto by revealing that fight, and back in raise Mitsuki up in terms of relevance by making that power something Boruto has concern over. It also provides a better way to break away from the formula that we've had for Boruto fights for a while. End of the chapter, you get the battle line set. the next 2 or 3 chapters, you have the fight take place where there's a big rug pull moment that happens, and then the other side throws down the reverse Uno card, and we get either an extending moment at the end of the next chapter, or the fight itself comes to a close. We've seen additional elements of storytelling being presented in other ways in Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, from slowing down the scenes like I wanted in Boruto Naruto Next Generations, to showcase a moment more like Ikimoto taking the Rasengan scene where Boruto hits code, and taking a page from Naruto's manga where Kishimoto would show the impact of the scene from a few different angles to raise the importance and the impact in the way of the scene itself, or slow down the scene in a flashback to show you more of what happened, like we saw with the Sasuke example. This would be another welcome plot twist to start throwing additional backstory as the fight's going on, but not to a point where it slows down the fight itself. The other thing about Koji and Boruto's flashback is that it makes the whole thing grab your attention and want you to sink your teeth into, is that it's a jarring moment waiting to happen. After Kashin Koji killed Jigen and he had his stuff up with Ishiki, the narrative didn't address what happened to him or pay off Ishiki's line about Koji likely going after Amato at some point. At some point in the next 2 volumes, getting the payoff of what happened to Koji afterwards and why he stayed in the shadows is something you could do, and something that the story does need actually explained. Could you go the route of saving that bit for when Koji confronts Amato? Yes, but I do think given the monthly format, it might be better to run it back when you get the Boruto flashback with how you met Koji in this moment, because Boruto saw what everyone assumed was Kashin Koji on a suicide mission, and it'll be more than logical from a narrative perspective to have him ask Koji, how are you still alive? There is a connective tissue there that can be used to connect these moments, while also giving a proper reintroduction to Koji and complete the whole heel to babyface turn for Kashin Koji's character. We're going to need more to continue building on the goodwill that the story has presented to us, and now that the story has fully ripped the band-aid off by sealing away Naruto at the end of Boruto and Naruto Next Generations, and revealing at the start of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex that Sasuke's been put on the shelf, the focus is on what Boruto told us at the start of Boruto and Naruto Next Generations, which is that it's his story now when you get to part 2, and now we're in the part where the story of father and son is done, since Boruto and Naruto Next Generations was a story of father and son, and it's now concluded. You have to make Boruto's relationship with Kashin Koji different from Jiraiya's relationship with Naruto. It has to be able to stand on its own narratively and not look like a complete mirroring of Naruto and Jiraiya with only a few tweaks. Boruto's character needs that just as much as Kashin Koji's character needs it, because the whole theme of what we've gotten for both of their characters, their arcs right now, are intertwined to a degree. Ikimoto told us years ago that Boruto's path was about throwing off familiar bonds and expectations to make his own path. Kishimoto told us his stance on cloning as far back as Naruto Gaiden, the 7th Hokage, and the Scarlet Spring when you read that story. With clones, it was about asking if clones are human with their own souls, or were they merely genetic copies of their original, mere tools meant to be discarded once they outlive their usefulness. Kashin Koji was used in that same position as Naruto Gaiden. Orochimaru viewed the clones the same way in Naruto Gaiden, the 7th Hokage, and the Scarlet Spring, and Shin Uchiha viewed his clones in that same manner in that same story, but on a more ruthless level, viewing them as organ donors and human shields, disposable. Amato viewed Kashin Koji as being disposable, and he went and sent him off on a death mission, all for the purposes of taking out Ishiki and giving Amato an open lane to start gaslighting Kawaki so that he can use karma to revive his daughter. There's something else to sink your teeth into here, and I hope the story itself explores it to give a deeper commentary on both of these themes, with both of them for their character arcs. I don't think so soon after we see Boruto standing beside Kashin Koji, a clone cyborg of Jiraiya, that we see Boruto entering into a battle with another clone in Mitsuki, the clone of Orochimaru. I do think the story is trying to cook up something here, but it's a matter of how long does it stay in the oven. Normally, I'm a proponent of letting the story cook long term and not chasing a moment to satisfy a quick high for the TikTok generation, but this is the one time I do think you make an exception, because it does feel like we're on the precipice of a bigger story, and the Boruto and Kashin Koji dynamic might get lost in the shuffle if that ends up being the case. This feels like a story that narratively deserves to be finished in the short term and doesn't need a bunch of crying babies on social media crying about a story being finished later on instead of at the soonest possible moment. To take another comparison to Jujutsu Kaisen without going into spoilers, the story teased a domain expansion for Yuta, but it didn't actually show us the domain expansion until the current chapter because of the symbolism of the domain expansion was needed to be shown in this moment against this very opponent because the narrative symbolism is there. And I feel Boruto's flashback with Kashin Koji needs to be handled right here, fighting a clone in Mitsuki who has Sage Mode. To further see why I say this so strongly, you'll need to watch the Jujutsu Kaisen chapter review you see on the screen.